Hallo und herzlich willkommen to Goethe Films. My name is Ahmed Allahwala and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to this month's film series on the topic of loneliness and the city. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has amplified the urgency to think about loneliness in the city because in many ways the pandemic city is a lonely city. Think about the partial closing down of public life, of public spaces, and how it has reduced and affected our ability for everyday urban sociability. How it has imposed on us a life that is relatively confined to the private spaces of our homes, for those fortunate enough to have a home and to be able to stay at home, but also perhaps how it has reasserted a life that is, exclusively with the nuclear family and all the stresses that that might bring. But perhaps more fundamentally, the very essence of the city, what makes a city a city. Think about the proximity to one another, the voluntary and involuntary coming into contact with one another, the possibility for chance encounters, and yes, the attraction to others. All of that has become a fraught experience in the context of the pandemic city. The three films Goethe is presenting to you today have nothing to do with the pandemic, but they offer us interesting opportunities to think about loneliness and the city. The three films in this month's lineup are all about the affective and emotional aspects of our lives and how they are entangled with the city. I think the unifying theme of the three films is that of what we refer to in German as Sehnsucht, which can be translated as nostalgia, a longing, a yearning for something. What does it mean to be in one's place, to feel out of place, to look for one's place, to lose one's place, but also to find one's place? All three films play with ideas and ideals of the city. They explicitly and implicitly revolve around the dichotomies of the individual and the community, the city and the village. On the one hand, we have the idea of the city as a site of modern alienation, of isolation, of loneliness. Here, the city of individuals is juxtaposed to perhaps romantic, traditional and idealistic notions of community life beyond the city. On the other hand, we have the ideal of the city as a site of liberation and freedom. Underlying this understanding is the idea that community denies individuals their difference, and it is precisely here where the promise of the city lies, and why it exerts such a powerful attraction to those who may not fit in elsewhere. But maybe there's a middle ground between these two positions, and I like to quote the late philosopher and political theorist Iris Marion Young, who normatively described city life as the being together of strangers. In collaboration with the Canadian Urban Institute, Goethe Toronto is presenting you with an exciting lineup of films this month. First, against the backdrop of a rather dreary and gloomy-looking Frankfurt beyond the city's glitzy corporate headquarters, Atlas, the Mover by David Navrat is the story of the simultaneous holding on to one's home and the search for one's home. It is a film about the desire to establish and re-establish relationships of kinship. It is a story about being both physically and emotionally rooted and uprooted in the contemporary German city. Then, Eine einsame Stadt, a lonely city, directed by Nicolas Grève, is a documentary that accompanies a group of Berliners and documents their particular experience of loneliness and being alone. And it highlights the particular quality of loneliness when it is experienced in a big city, in close proximity to so many others. But the film also perhaps somewhat inadvertently captures the simultaneous production of relations of kinship and social infrastructures through what might seem everyday and mundane urban practices like going to the pub, the Kneipe as we say, going to the gym, going to the hairdresser. And lastly, the film Neubau, directed by Johannes Maria Schmidt, is the story of Markus, a trans man in the Uckermark region, just about an hour north of Berlin. The film revolves around the idea of the promise of the queer city, which in Marcus's case is Berlin, but through Marcus's affection to Duc, a queer Vietnamese-German TV mechanic, who is calmly and quite unabashedly in his place in the Uckermark village. The director troubles and queers any simple and convenient juxtaposition between the city as open and welcoming and the countryside as oppressive or parochial. So with that said, I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Viel Vergnügen, as we say in German, and thank you.